Hey everyone, my name is Christian, and today I'm going to be teaching you guys about keyframe animation, and specifically animating a bouncing ball. So first of all, what is keyframe animation? Textbook definition is animation that is created with frames at specific points in time to convey an action. Now, I have my own personal take on this definition, but keyframe is essentially animation that is created manually by an animator. So that anything that is not visual effects, anything that's not AI based, anything that's not physics generated, or something that motion capture data uses, for example. So now that we know the definition, what is the simplest form of animation? Well, it's very clear based on the headline, but it's a bouncing ball. It's usually the first assignment that students get in animation classes. It's usually the first thing you learn about how to animate, and it's something that professionals go back to as a foundational skill to improve their fundamentals by going back and animating a bouncing ball. So how is this going to be useful? Unfortunately, in the world of cinema, film, TV, video games, there's not too many bouncing balls in the world. So how is this going to be useful when you have to animate something like a big gorilla, a small child, an object that's not a ball, for example, like a camera, right? The great thing about it, and what is one of the great secrets of animation, is that everything is a bouncing ball. Now, you can look at the head as a bouncing ball on its own, the shoulder, the elbow itself, the hands, the center of mass, which is the waist, or the COG as we call it, even the back legs as well. They're all bouncing balls working together with each other to create the sense and form of movement. And it's a secret that anyone can use to kind of figure out the workflow of whatever creature and whatever character you're animating or working on, which is excellent. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, how does a ball bounce, right? Well, there's a few variants on this. It depends on the ball. So on one side of the spectrum, you have something as bouncy and light as something like a bouncy ball. So very elastic, very rubbery, has a lot of bounce and velocity once it contacts the ground or you throw it up into the air, right? There's something in the middle, which is something like a soccer ball, basketball, any sort of mid-sized ball here that you need to give it enough force to basically move it through the action it needs, right? And on the opposite end of the spectrum of the bouncy ball, we have something heavy, like a bowling ball, a wrecking ball, for example, right? And basically the shape is not really going to change too much when it is forced around or impacted by something. Usually something like a bowling ball is going to generate force on the other objects around it. So when it hits the ground, it might crack the ground a little bit, but it takes a lot more energy and force to crack a bowling ball, for example. So we can start by saying some keyframes. If we just take the simple drawing of a ball on a ground plane, right? How can we start animating it, right? Well, obviously we need this first pose here of the ball on the ground, contacting, right? It's looking solid, looking good. My favorite color, green. Next pose, or next drawing, is basically the ball going up into the air. We'll put it about halfway from the ground to where we want our highest point of the jump to be. So let's put it halfway for now, okay? Third drawing, just up top. So this is gonna be our peak of the jump. And basically if you scrub through these frames, you can see it's traveling upward and it's going high, right? So after that, we need to define some sort of hang time for some physics and believability here, right? So we'll just set it a little bit higher in our drawing here. So you can see the difference here, not too much. Basically, this is the part of the jump or the bounce where gravity is now taking over and the ball has lost all its velocity, or it's losing all of its velocity at the peak of the jump. And that's where it starts to come down and gravity's pulling down on the object itself. So that's where the velocity and the hang time of this is basically the velocity losing its momentum and then gravity starting to take effect, right? And that's what causes our next frame, which is to fall. So again, we'll set it to about halfway here, as you can see, kind of like where we had it previously, right? And the final one for a simple motion like this is just have it back on the ground, right? So if you look through, goes up, a little bit of hang time, comes down, right? Pretty vanilla, pretty generic. And I think we can do better. So if we go back to our example here of this image of a bouncing ball, so each of these drawings is the path and each frame of the bouncing ball animation itself. So if you put each of these circles into a animation software, like 2D software, you could see how the ball would actually bounce in this path and that sort of thing, okay? So if you look at the parts where the ball actually makes a contact, so you see on the ground here where it squishes flat like this, and also right before where the ball is stretching outwards, kind of like a kidney bean a little bit, and it's stretching up here as well on the second one here. So this is a phenomenon, one of the first things animators learned, called squash and stretch, okay? Just like that. So squash and stretch, I've highlighted the poses here. So squash is in red, and then the stretch poses are in green. Now, a key thing to remember for squash and stretch, it applies to bouncing balls, it applies to everything in the body, but the important thing to understand is when you squash and stretch an object for the sake of animation, it is not increasing or decreasing in volume. So for example, if you look at the shape and volume of these balls, even though the shape is clearly changed, the mass of the object is not different. It's not smaller, it's not bigger, it's the same size as this regular sphere. It's just the mass is stretched out to a believable amount where it looks like it's just changing shape because of the effectiveness of it landing on the ground and also gaining momentum towards the ground, right? That's why you see these squash and stretch poses in these specific spots. And as you notice, as the arc curves and you see each bounce is less and less, so this first one is quite steep, and then the bounce is a little less, and then a little less, and a little less. And with each significant consecutive bounce, you'll notice that the squash and stretch shapes are much less exaggerated compared to the first one here, right? You can see they get less and less exaggerated here, okay? So with that in mind, if we come back to our ball here, how can we take what we just learned and progress it further, right? So we can take our ball at the beginning here, flat on the ground, and we can stretch it up, just like we did previously in the drawing. So just this little transition here, it's basically keeping it on the ground because it's going to have the energy of coming up, okay? And that's a full stretch. So now we're going to have it in our third drawing, halfway in between again, but we're going to keep some of this stretch in our third drawing here, just to keep the idea that it's coming out of a stretch here, right? You can see the difference here. Okay, next drawing, we're going to take it back to the peak, just like we did before. So with this one, we're basically removing all the squash and stretch because it's now reaching its velocity, or its hang time of the velocity here. And we're going to create a stretch pose for the hang time, okay? But we're going to add some of that squash in the air. So once it reaches its velocity peak here and gravity starts to take effect, we're going to have it come up just about the same as we did before, but we're going to add some of that squash in that pose there, see? Now, next pose, obviously the ball has to come down just like before, so we're going to have it start to come down. And you see we're going to add some of that stretch back in there from previously, just to build and lead into the final stretch that we're going to do before it actually lands on the ground here. So if we scrub through, you can see, and we get into our final stretch. So you can basically copy that first drawing, the second drawing we did of the ball stretching upwards. This is just now coming at the end of the bounce, right? And instead of having it just be flat on the ground like we did before, we're going to have to actually squash. Now with the squash, now it's full in compression, and we're going to have it bounce back up in our final drawing of having it resting up here. So that's a lot better, right? If we scrub through, you can see this is a lot more lifelike, a bit more organic, a bit more fleshy, right? And this is just with simple drawings, you can convey exactly what the ball is doing and the kind of energy and feel of it, right? Now, there's some things here that is a little vanilla still. Basically, if you look at something like the timing, like everything here is happening at the same time in terms of the spacing. So if you look from here to the middle point, to the high point, it's the same distance every time, right? So when the ball goes up, it takes the same amount of time to get to halfway, it takes the same amount of time to get to the top, and it takes the same amount of time to get to the middle and then back to the ground again, right? Obviously with the squash and stretch poses in there, it gives it a little bit of variance, but it's quite boring, right? So where can we go from here? We can actually take it directly to Maya. So Maya is a 3D animation software that I use professionally as an animator, And you can use any 3D software. You can use Blender, you can use Softimage, you can use 3ds Max, any sort of software. You can even do this in 2D like I was showing you earlier. But essentially what you can do is start posing the ball. So we'll create the similar example here. So we'll have the ball on the ground. We're going to have the ball anticipate. So this is going to be adding some character personality to our ball, basically giving it some sort of life here. So we actually have a stretch controller just at the ball top here, and this will allow us to squash and stretch it. If you want to have access to this ball rig, I will post it in the description box below, and you can grab it for yourself and try it out. But first we're going to set a keyframe on everything here, and also we're going to turn off the geo selection because we don't want to do that. It's a good habit. So set a key on frame 1, set a key on frame 5, and frame 5 we're going to squash down the ball just a bit here. And the reason why we're going to do this is we're going to make it feel like it's more alive, okay? Because if it's not alive, then it can't have an anticipation, usually, right? So the ball's going to squish down like this. And then we're going to have it take off. So we're going to hold this for just a bit. Let's hold it for 5 frames. Just going to copy it over. And we'll squash it just a bit further. So just like that, okay? I usually animate a lot by feel, so if you just play something multiple times, you can see how it feels, and if it looks good, you can carry on. So, based on our example, we're going to need a stretch pose, right? So we're going to take the ball from the top here. So we're going to set it to, let's say about 2 frames. So let's make this quite dramatic. And we'll do a stretch pose. And the nice thing in CG, it'll actually maintain the volume, and you don't have to worry about matching the exact volume compared to a drawing. A little more difficult, but you can still definitely doable. So we'll see what that looks like. A lot of energy here. It's nice and snappy, right? Now this is basically the anticipation, and the reason why we're holding it is because we want more anticipation, because this is a bigger stretch that we're doing here, so that's why you need that build up. Basically, to generate a certain amount of energy, you need the equal opposite in the amount of anticipation, right? You can't just go from 0 to 100 without something pushing you that far, okay? So always think about that. So once the ball is in our stretch pose, the next thing, logically, we have to take it off, right? So we're going to have it rise up. Let's bring it to, let's say, frame 20. We're just going to have it go up to our peak here. And we're going to reduce, oops. Let's click on Translate Y. We can just reduce it back to about default here. And in 3D, you'll actually see it does maintain that stretch, and it starts to fade until it gets back to 0 here. So you can see just like this here, right? So it's a little slow. You can see how it kind of, there's a lot of this energy here, but it needs to get to its pose at frame 20 a lot faster, right? So how can we do that? There's a few ways. Easiest way is we make sure everything is selected, set a keyframe on it, make sure, and then also on the frame before. And we can just make it happen faster. So if it's stretching on frame 12, we can say maybe in 5 frames. And I don't know these numbers in my head, I'm just trying to see it out and feel it out. So it's not too bad here. We maybe try one more frame. Probably the other way. Let's try 18. Yeah, I think 1 frame before. We can always come back to it. We just want to make sure that our main storytelling poses are in there, right? So now that we have the hold here, when it gets to our peak, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create a little bit of hang time here, and we're going to add some of that squash into it. Okay, so let's hold this for, let's say, frame 21, something like that. Now I'm going to have the bottom control actually come up, because we're going to stretch from the bottom, right? And we're also going to move the ball up a little bit, just to give it some more hang time and fleshiness. Because you want it to keep traveling past the point. That's where when you, in a basketball, when you toss the ball, there's like that little moment where it rises higher and then comes down. Okay. Something like that. And we could probably exaggerate it a little more. So you can just drag it up a little higher. There you go, something like that. Okay. And now the ball needs to come down, right? So let's go ahead, let's say, I don't know, let's just try 28. Set a keyframe on everything, and then just select the main ball controller. And we're gonna click Translate Y just to make sure that it's on the axis. If you just click on the controller and have the ball selected from here, if you're trying to go downward, you might get some offset in the other translations that you don't want. We're just doing it straight up and down. So clicking on Translate Y, now it highlights this yellow part of the arrow, which is the Y controller. And if we middle mouse drag, it's going to drag it lower now. And it's going to be perfect. So even if we go left and right, it's not possible to change those values, as you can see on the values here. Okay. So let's get it back down. What we can also do, alternatively, is if we have the pose previously that where we want it to be, we can simply just take that pose at frame 1 and then copy it. Right? And now it comes down. So it's a little generic here, right? So again, we can do the same thing here. So let's add the stretch pose first, and then we'll see how it's going to be looking. So let's do a big stretch here, set a keyframe, and actually let's have it set on the ground at this frame here. Actually, you know what? Yeah, let's do it like this. Have it stretch on this frame. We'll delete this key. And we want to copy just to make sure it's on the ground. There we go. Nice. So I'll select everything, set a key, and now it's going down and it's stretching. Okay. So timing we can adjust after. But we just want the poses in there. So we'll have it squash really quickly. So just a stretch into a squash. We want that sensation to be pretty quick. So it shouldn't ever really go over 1 frame. So if you do a fast action, it should at least have 2 frames in there. You might get issues with motion blur and other stuff like that. So usually something that moves really quickly over 1 frame is technically a pop. However, there are techniques that I can go over later that basically includes smear frames and more cartoony stuff that kind of smooths that out. But that's another video. So we're going to create a squash pose here from the top. So something like this. And for fun, pull it down just ever so slightly as well. Okay, and then we need to get it back up to default. So let's say 5 frames later, something like that. We can just zero out this controller here to make it go back to our normal state. And also the bottom controller. Zero it up. Select everything. Actually, I'll make sure I select this because I just realized there is an extra here. So we're going to make sure this is at default. There we go. And then default. There you go. Cute little bounce, right? So I'm going to just go through, make sure our timeline has all keys on it. So basically making sure that every controller that we're using has a keyframe on it. So if we need to adjust our timing, it's very easy to drag stuff on our timeline and adjust it, right? And we can take a look at it without controllers. I recommend having a hotkey for this. So look, bounce, going up and down, right? So timing we can adjust. I think it's looking okay. It could be a lot better. So I think this action needs to be faster here. So from here to here. So I'm gonna have it go really quickly here. So I'm gonna probably double the amount of speed now that we have all the poses in there. Seems a lot better. And now we're going to adjust the hang time so it's a bit more, and we can actually exaggerate. If we go into our graph editor, you can see the translate Y curve. This is probably the easiest curve to understand as a beginner, but basically all you need to do is raise this keyframe. So right here, frame 19, this is frame 19 in the graph editor here. You can see the number 19 here, and then the keyframe here. So you can just hold shift, middle mouse drag after you've box selected the key, and then you can move up the key. And then what's nice is that you can see in the viewport of it changing itself, right? So you can make this higher if we like, and I think it would add quite a nice bit of dynamicness to the hang time here. Now we've hit a bit of an issue here. Now the hang time is nice at the beginning, but it kind of stops almost immediately here, right? So we need to add something where it hangs for just a bit longer, and as it starts to come down, it kind of slows out of that hang time, and then it's going to come down really quickly, okay? So I think around here, around 2 frames here, we'll set a key on everything, okay? And we're mostly going to be just affecting the translate Y curve. So we're going to go back to that key we just set. So on frame 21 you can see here. So I'm going to select it with left click, and then I'm going to drag it up so we have a little bit more hang time here. Now if we close our graph editor, set a key, make sure everything's there. Now you can see there's a bit more of a hang time here, right? So it's a lot better, more fluid and entertaining. So as it comes down, it kind of loses its speed, right? We kind of want it to like keep that same energy and then maintain speed instead of slowing into this pose, right? So how can we do that? Well, one of my go-to techniques, you go back to our graph editor here, you can see, oops, sorry. If you go back in graph editor, look at our translate Y here, you see the curve in the graph editor is kind of coasting, and it's like this nice like slow ramp. And you can think of this like speed. So if you look at the speed and the fluidity of the curve, it's very nice, very coasting, and it's just gently kind of rolling into the next curve here, right? So we kind of don't want that in this situation because we want the ball to be gaining momentum here and then be basically really fast entering into this stretch pose here, right? Because with this amount of stretch in the pose, you want this to be really strong. So I'm going to highlight the key that we want to be affected here, and what I'm going to do is affect the left. So there are these things called tangents here. So if you select a key, you'll see these little handles appear, right? These are called tangents. I don't recommend doing this, but you can alter them like this, and it'll kind of change how the animation is curving and being interpolated, which is what 3D software does. So basically, whatever keyframes you set, everything that doesn't have a keyframe is called interpolation, and what the computer will do. And as animators, usually we want to avoid having the computer interpolate what keys and information we're giving it. So we want to always be in control of what we're doing. So what we're going to do to make this work for us is we're going to select it. We're going to select just the left tangent here, because we don't want to affect this side of the animation. We want to affect this side here, right? This curve that's currently highlighted in white, okay? Now we're going to go to the top here. Usually animation, you set it to auto because it kind of gives you the smoothest curves and the best control. It also flattens out information for you a bit easier. We're going to actually set this to linear. This is probably the second most used tangent I go for, and I use it for special cases like this for this reason, which you'll see. Click it. You see now it changed the curve, so it's basically a straight line. So it's like, right? And that's kind of the feeling we want here, right? So the timing is obviously not fast enough for my liking. I think this is up to taste here. It's a little cartoonish, a little bit friendly. But I want it to have more impact here, so it's taking too long for my enjoyment here. So I'm going to reduce it by half. Usually if you're finding something is a little too slow, too fast, I always try working in values of 50%. So I make it 50% faster, 50% slower, and I push it way past what I think it should be. And usually I'll find that I didn't actually go that far, and I can just tone it back by like 10%, 20%, right? Because the thing in animation often is if you don't push it far enough, then you don't know how far you can actually go, which is the fine line that you have to learn yourself as an artist. But that mostly comes with experience, and again, like I said, try it yourself. Try pushing it way past where you think it should be, and you'll probably be in the ballpark in most cases. So I'm going to take it back from frame 21 to 26. So let's make it happen by frame 23. Let's just see. Oof, it's way too fast. So actually make sure we're selecting everything. There we go. Because now when we move the timeline, our curves won't be, or our keys won't be offset. So let's try 23. I think that's probably too fast. You know what? I just proved myself wrong. I think this is pretty good. Let's try 1 frame. See what that looks like. You know, I think both are pretty good. I like both. I'm not opposed to either. Let's turn off the controls to see. I recommend setting a hotkey. Currently I use Shift Q to turn off the NURBS curves, which are the controllers. Highly recommend you guys do that. This looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. It's a cute ball. It's got a lot of energy. It's a little bit happy, actually. But if you guys take these same principles, you can create any sort of ball animation. And in the next video, I'll show you guys how to take this kind of idea further. If there's any suggestions you guys have for what you want to see, I can definitely create a new video as well. But I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day, be kind to each other, and I'll catch you guys later. Thanks so much.